Can we really be on a big roll as one of the greatest horror years of all time? Maybe. Let's talk about it. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium spoiler-filled discussion for Smile 2, the newest film from director Parker Finn. Okay, warning, spoilers in the discussion, so if you've not seen Smile 2, definitely go watch it first, then come back and watch the review. Okay, Smile was a huge success. It was a huge surprise. You know, it wasn't like the greatest horror film I've ever seen, but for what it was doing, the type of genre that it was in, the fact that it felt very samey to something like It Follows, in that realm of like something attaches to you and will not let you go. The Ring, for instance. It didn't make it entirely original, but it was fun. I think Parker Finn had a pretty fun idea that a lot of horror directors that come up in the making just don't do. And so after that huge success that was the first Smile, which over $100 million, of course they're going to greenlight a brand new Smile film. So here we have a new one that stars Naomi Scott. And basically, it's the same premise in a lot of respects. Naomi Scott, but with a different type of character. Naomi Scott's a famous musician, famous, celebrity. She, of course, gets in an accident due to substance abuse, which is very common in unfortunately, the music world and the entertainment industry and stuff like that. And she's trying to recover, but she has issues. She, of course, still taking some drugs, but she's basically trying to be on the road to recovery. Her mother is played by Rosemarie DeWitt, is very demanding of her. She's in that. It's basically a movie about substance abuse, about trying to overcome that, and how we keep going back to those dark places. Very similar to the first Smile film. She actually, after going to her drug dealer / somebody she knew in high school, basically comes across the Smile curse. The guy kills himself with the weight, as you see in the trailer, and she starts to unwind and unravel because of that curse. It becomes a much more grander version of what we saw in the first film. More scares, more interesting dynamics, more of the way the curse inhabits you. There's a guy that comes into the mix who tells her that this curse is like a form of brain virus of some sort. It just eats you away. It's very much like what drugs do and stuff like that. As it moves along, she starts to succumb to this Smile curse and stuff like that. So that's kind of where the story lies. Once again, Parker Finn's given a much bigger budget of $28 million. Of course, he's gone to a much grander scale, a much grander scope, bigger set pieces, much more diverse locations. And he's given us a character who is much more what I would call dimensional than the character that was in the original film. That's just kind of what it seemed like from the trailer. But I really liked the first movie. It's not the greatest horror film, like I said, of all time, but I enjoyed it for what it's worth. And then I heard about how good this movie was. I heard it was fantastic. I heard it was actually a step above, that it was just one of the best horror films of this year, and that's really difficult to do when you have stuff like The Substance and Late Night with the Devil and every other horror film I've seen this year. It's been a crazy year for horror films, but when it comes to sequels, a lot of times they do improve. Terminator 2, for instance, stuff like that. Empire Strikes Back. So the question remains, did this film do that? And absolutely it does. I think it's a much better film. I think it's a much marked improvement for Parker Finn. I think the character of Skye, who's played by Naomi Scott, is much more interesting to watch, has much more weight on her shoulders, deals with some really... I'm not saying that the character from the first one that Sosie Bacon played was not dimensional. I think there's a lot more going into the story that allowed Parker Finn to expand on his universe, but also give much more dimension. I mean, we were dealing with a woman who's dealing with some real issues and dealing with some real, dimensional weight and how she has to handle everything. You see it from the very beginning, how she's on the Drew Barrymore show, and the facade that she has to go on, and when she's signing autographs, and how she has to deal with that, and she has to deal with her mother and her, the people that are working with her, and everything having to go to a gala to support under the youths that are not very well off. And there's just a lot of weight. It really is a movie about a lot of societal weight that goes upon a celebrity, or in this case a musician. And it does it with really great style, really great pizzazz. This is, unlike something like Trap, where I felt like the musician character doesn't give a lot of weight. Here, because she's thrown into the forefront, she's having to deal with this situation, like a demonic situation, where it could be an allegory for drugs and drug abuse and how it affects your mental state. It really does a nice job of doing that, because it gets to a point in this movie where you're not even really sure what's real and what's not. And And the guy that she runs into, who was the brother of someone who killed himself in the Smile curse, really goes into depth of like, you're gonna get, this is something that Smile 1 didn't really get into because it was a much smaller budgeted film, but because they're able to expand, it goes into the details of how this curse happens, how it truly works, and how it manipulates you into believing certain things and doing certain things. And it's a really fascinating thing where I think it really much markedly improves the nature. I mean, this series could go on to be something really truly awful, but if Parker Finn, who I hope he goes into do some other things, but if he keeps going the way he's going, he's really going to expand this into a really competent horror-filled universe. And I think after watching this, taking it to the next level that he does, where, you know, Naomi Scott unfortunately dies at the end of this movie because that's just the way the Smile universe works, that when the whole entire arena watches her die and is affected by the curse, that is a nice level step up to how this curse operates. It's, you know, unlike the unfortunate nature of the American version of Ring 2, where it just kind of was the same nonsense and then you got rings and stuff like that. It just wasn't very good. But that first movie was so good, like Smile, the original movie, that it was kind of sad to see. But Smile 2 just takes it to a new level. You know, watching Parker Finn use the same techniques with the upside down camera and how that works is really cool. The nature of, like, there's a whole scene where she's in her bed or in her apartment, which a lot of this movie takes place in, and you have, you know, the crazed fan that you see in the movie who, like, is disgusting looking, which there are some issues with this movie with, like, how the crazed fan just has boils on his face and stuff like that. I mean, crazed fans, the way they portray him is not really, but the way they use him later on, I think it does get a little too much. It's a little long for his taste. I think, you know, the point where Naomi Scott's Sky thinks she killed her mother is really interesting. And there's points where you're like, especially at the end of the movie, you're like, is this stuff real? Is it not? And you find out it was real. So whatever's happening in this movie can be a little confusing, which is perfectly all right. I understand, like, what Parker Finn is doing, and I get it, but it can be a little confusing for audiences that are kind of like, okay, so what was real? And I mean, none of it could be real. I mean, it's just up to your interpretation. Some of it could be real. The brother that she meets, or, you know, her best friend who she hasn't talked to for a while, that could be just interpreted. I mean, there's points where, you know, it's insinuated that the curse has basically made her think that her best friend was never there. But it's not. It's one of those things where, like, I think it could be structured better, where maybe there's like a flashback at the end. I mean, sometimes they do that. Maybe that's a little overplayed. I don't know. But I think for what it's worth, I still think this is a very successful movie, because I think the scares, though there are some jump scares which I don't like, really work. I do think they are very creative. I think the idea of, like, that, seeing the apartment where you have a bunch of people who are smiling that are her dancers and people she works with that are attacking her, and one injects, like, their arm into her mouth, and, you know, it leads into the crazy sequence between her and Ray Nicholson, who's the son of course, Jack Nicholson, where they kind of Parker Finn does a really cool creative shot where they have, like, real close-ups on the two driving when they're doing substance abuse before the accident, which we see a lot of in this movie, and they're going back and forth between it's kind of like what Alfonso Cuarón did in Children of Men, where the camera is, like, in the middle of the car, and this might be some CGI effect, I'm sure the outside was, but you're constantly moving between the two characters like this, and it's really creative because it gives you a really kind of claustrophobic feel that makes you feel like you're in the car, but it also gives, like, that point of view of, like, how the drugs and how hysteria can create such a powerful, overwhelming effect that when things become angry, your center focus just becomes, like, narrow viewed. And I really appreciate that. I thought it was really cool. And the idea of, like, expanding upon what the curse does and how it affects this poor woman, and, like, going to the gala for the you know, underprivileged youth, and, you know, the teleprompter not working, or she thinks it's not working, and giving out, like, spewing out all her feelings about what her stardom has done to her and how it affects the people on the audience. And then Ray Nicholson comes up and he's smiling at her, and it causes her, you know, her to jump and kind of knock the poor old woman on the ground. It's just, that's really cool stuff. And, like, you know, for instance, when they're on the stage of the arena and they're practicing, and Ray Nicholson pops up real quickly, or, you know, the drug dealer guy pops up real quickly. And I just like the expansion of the idea and how it represents, like, the psyche of the individual and how it affects the psyche of the individual. So this curse is basically eating off your worst ambitions, your worst fears, your worst things, tendencies that you have done to yourself. And the fact that it uses Naomi Scott's Sky character to that drug abuse and how she feels about her mother, and when she she walks into her dressing room and it's destroyed, that could be assumed as drug abuse, and all these kinds of things that are playing into the mix of this movie. It's a really kind of it's really impressive how Parker Finn has structured and been able to keep everything in check, even though it can be a little confusing. And when Sky thinks she kills her mother, or when you think the demon is killing the mother, and you see how gruesome that is, and how she just got tired of it, and how it just starts affecting, and you just don't know what's real at that point. Even up to the point where she goes to the abandoned Pizza Hut and she's hurt her foot, and she thinks she's controlled the demon by saying using the techniques that you would use in Drug Abuse Anonymous or something like that, AA and stuff like that. And then you find out no, none of it really was real, or for the most part wasn't really real, and she somehow found her way onto a stage with a whole bunch of people. And her mother is not dead. She has her, attendee guy, I can't remember what his name is. And then you have the other individual who's the one who asked her to go to the gala, who's kind of a close companion to them, who's the benefactor in a lot of respects. And then you realize what is going on. It's that kind of kinetic energy. And then on top of everything, when she sees her smiling at the end of the stage, and it cuts it open, and then it reveals this really cool looking monster, which was much cooler than, unfortunately, the original one, which was kind of cheesy. But that's the unfortunate nature of what Parker Finn's able to do now compared to what he's done now. He's much more confident, so he can expand the creature, and you can forgive him for not having a very limited budget and being one of his I think it was his first movie or something like that. So I give it a lot of credit. It's very well done. I like the idea of the idea that even the brother is telling her, we can kill you and bring you back and that'll stop the curse. Well, it's not entirely sure if that's even possible. This feels going into territory of apocalyptic scenarios, like the third movie, if there is a third movie, which I think there could be if this movie does well, of how this thing just is everywhere now. It affects everyone. This is what's cool about this franchise, is the nature of what you see and what you're feeling and how it traumatizes you. And these people are going to have different experiences with this monster based on, if they're in a domestic abuse situation, or they're in a war scenario, maybe they're, off on shore leave, and how that affects. There's so many avenues Parker Finn could go with this franchise, and I really think it's going to be interesting. I hope it doesn't expand to the point where it becomes, just a really kind of crappy Paranormal Activity situation. Once again, I hope that Parker Finn does a competent job with this series, and hopefully does something new. I also give credit to Naomi Scott, who does a really fantastic job. She has a lot of weight on her shoulders and having to deal with a lot of stuff in this movie. And her mother, played by Rosemarie DeWitt, is just the same. She's also fantastic. And, you have her best friend, Gemma, who I can't remember, is played by Dylan Gelula, I think is how they pronounce their name. She's also good, but I think Naomi Scott does a really fantastic job, and has to do a lot with a horror film, which sometimes that doesn't happen. So overall, this movie just runs on all cylinders. It's confusing a little bit. I think it tries to be confusing a lot of times because it wants to keep you on your feet. So when things happen, it's very gory. So when it does a lot of shocking things. There's a point where the crazed fan, you see all his clothes, you see how nasty that is. But once again, there are things that I don't like about this movie, just with the nature of it could be a little more structured, competently. But I think this is well above what the first movie did, which I do like. And I think this is a great step forward, and it has great, interesting ideas and concepts, and deals with the scenarios really, really well. So overall, I love Smile 2. It's just another, possible top 10 of the year for me. In a year of horror films, I might have a top 10 horror films instead of a top 10 actual films, because I've seen better horror films than I've seen actual films this year. So we'll see what happens there. But highly recommend Smile 2, especially if you like Smile. If you like good horror films, I think this is a highly recommended film. You don't need to see the first one. There are things like Kyle Gallner is in the first movie. that he's in this one as well, because he has a small thing at the beginning of the movie before the movie starts. But you really don't need to see the first one if you just want to watch this one, because they do get into a lot of details of what the disease or the monster or whatever you want to call it deals with. But this is a very competently put together film. So anyways, that'll be my take on Smile 2, now in theaters. Definitely worth a watch. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. Comments below, what do you think of the first Smile? If you've seen Smile 2, let me know what you think of that as well. Otherwise, if you like what you see on this channel, awesome, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome, hit that like button. And as always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out, guys.